the rest of the story. Neil Williamson was 15 years young. He was already the town's premier practical joker, and practically nobody knew it. After the custodian discovered a cow in the high school corridor one morning, students laughed aloud and teachers behind cupped hands, but nobody suspected the artful smuggler was Neil. And when motorists began reporting a hideous creature lurking in the lonesome woods by night, out along the Iron City cutoff, hearers were variously skeptical and fearful, but nobody suspected the creature was Neil. The latter was Neil's favorite of his innumerable, sometimes elaborate pranks, partly because it had been conceived so spontaneously. Smitten by small-town boredom one evening, the boy had waited until his parents were asleep to swipe the family Ford. With no permission nor even a license to drive, Neil cruised the local back roads. Then he remembered the ancient sun-bleached cow's skull that he had once found in the back seat of the car. Big old skull with big old horns intact. Anyway, Neil got this idea. He would stand up along the roadside with his long black coat pulled up covering his head and the huge horned skull held high above it, and thus attired, he would wait for somebody to drive down the road, catch a glimpse of him in the headlights, and then he would dash off into the woods. Well, that he did. And sure enough, the next day the word spread like foxfire. Margaret Teague had been driving home from her county hospital job late the night before, had seen a horrible, hairy monster, she said, with a massive head, and horns, and long, sharp teeth, she said. A common animal of some kind, somebody later suggested. Oh, no, insisted Margaret. It walked upright like a man. And when her car ran into a roadside ditch and got stuck there for a moment, she exclaimed, quote, "I just knowed the booger had me for sure." Well, you can imagine how inspired was Neil Williamson upon learning of the local commotion that he had caused. And so began the haunting of that lonely stretch of road, a series of monstrous appearances which lasted all that spring. At least 8 nighttime travelers swore that they had seen the creature. And then one night, with summer approaching, Neil, costumed as usual, was preparing to frighten the next victim, when around the bend roared a pickup truck with a searchlight mounted on the fender. And before the teenage prankster realized what was happening, rifle shots rang out. Neil turned. He ran as fast as he could into the woods, but the searchlight kept sweeping through the trees, and the guns kept blazing away, and the bullets were singing over his head. And by the time Neil had scrambled across a pasture and stumbled into a barbed wire fence, the countryside, at long last, was dark and quiet once more. Oh, you can bet that was the last anybody ever saw of the creature which denizens of Calhoun County, Alabama, have revived around campfires ever since. For once upon a Halloween come early, in the spring of 1969, there was a beast born of boredom that made statewide and then national news as the Choco Loco Monster. The Choco Loco Monster. For decades, an impenetrable mystery. Then 32 years later, now, the culprit confesses the rest of the story.